Hello everyone, Sam here, back with some more Bloons T5s. On this week of Bloonarius, which is uncarved, we are trying out the super buffed Wizard Lord Phoenix versus Bloonarius. This will be the first wizard test I've done against Bloonarius. It took me a while to get to them, but I figured now would be the perfect time, because if you didn't know, Wizard Paragon is confirmed to be the next Paragon. Back in a blog post a little while ago, they announced that the next three Paragons were going to be NG, Ace, and Wizard. So of course NG Ace already out, and Wizard is going to be next Paragon. Of course they won't really come until 2023 I believe, as you know Ninja Kiwi is working on a new tower called the Beast Handler, as well as working on Dread Bloons, so that should be hopefully coming in the next update or next few updates. Anyways, moving back onto this, Wizard Lord Phoenix isn't really a tower I kind of use a lot, as I kind of feel like it's a bit meh and relies too much on stalling tactics in order to really make the best of it. Of course, you know, it is unfair to say that, oh, this tower is bad just because it relies on yada yada to be the best, but simply just because I don't personally like stalling tactics, as that takes a while when you're using chimps runs, and I don't really want to sit there for like 40 something minutes, you know, just like either waiting for 012 ice to pop a ceramic or something, so that way I can actually use the ability for next round. As it is kind of meh when the ability is kind of off, but when it's on, it shreds a lot. Anyways, the stats for the Wizard Lord Phoenix is basically the main wizard gains a huge overhaul in the fire attacks. The deep Dragon's Breath attack gains 50 pierce instead of 4 and deals 6 damage each. The Fireball attack deals 27 damage instead of 9, and the Wall of Fire attack deals 3 damage per tick. Alright, so for tier 1, you can't really afford Wizard Lord Phoenix kind of realistically, although it's not like you really need to anyways. I was kind of a bit short. I was considering restarting to kind of optimize farming to the point where I was able to afford it, but I figured that wasn't necessarily necessary, as I figured that Phoenix was good enough in order to actually be able to beat this tier Bloonarius. The only thing I really feel like I needed was just kind of a Chinook, as well as just some Phoenix, so that way I can, Chinook the Phoenix kind of around if I ever really need to. Getting kind of a village in the middle, just so that way whenever I do have to Chinook around, I don't have to keep buying and reselling the village. Although looking at that spot, it's not really too great. Looking at the damage from the Phoenix, it's kind of, it's not really that bad. Of course, it's not really ideal, and it's going to take a really long time to pop this down, since I am kind of relying heavily on the Sun Phoenix ability in order to actually pop down this tier of Bloonarius. Thankfully, it does do a decent chunk of damage every time the ability is active, so it's not terrible, but it's not really that great either. So how does Phoenix do against the first ceramic wave? Not actually all that bad, to be honest. I figured that, since Summon Phoenix doesn't really have a whole lot of pierce, kind of figured that, maybe it wouldn't really do too great, but thankfully it's not really that bad. All I gotta do is just kind of make sure that, whenever the ability is active, I kind of use it for the ceramic skull. I am going to be using Jerry's Fire for just kind of increasing damage, because Jerry's Fire does count on pops for that tower and is technically a buff, so I figured I might as well allow it. Before, I just didn't really use it, not really sure why. I think I probably just kind of forgot about it, but again, doesn't really matter. Looking at the damage yet again, it seems that it's going to take like 9 or so rounds in order to actually pop down this tier of Bloonarius, which of course isn't really bad, but this does slow down your farming heavily, and definitely not a strategy you want to use for Elite. I think, Chinook and Phoenix is a lot more expensive than the Sticky Bomb and Recursive Cluster meta that still is prevalent. Thankfully for tier 2, you are able to easily afford a WLP. I was kind of hoping that, WLP by itself was going to do mad damage. Looking at the damage from just the base Phoenix, it is absolutely awful. Even just with the kind of powerful Lava Phoenix ability, I still don't feel like that's really that great. For a $54,000 tower, it is kind of underwhelming at this stage. Even taking down 75k of HP isn't really too of a tall task for most tier 5s that are damage based, but this guy just is very slow when it comes to dealing damage. He really does like to take his time, I guess is what you could call it. Thankfully, he is able to take down tier 2. Looking at the damage, it is quick enough in order to actually beat the skull of Bloonarius, but it is going to be very slow. I didn't really want to get too much support, as I do need to focus on farming. Using Summon Phoenix for tier 1 really did slow down my farming heavily, and not really help me propel myself as much as I really wanted to at this stage. Tier 2 is also going to be the similar issue, because if you see right now, having to spend like 54k on, very slow, very slow, I guess, Bloonarius damage isn't really too ideal. So just kind of waiting. I am kind of looking at my money count just to make sure I do have enough to go for a Banana Central, which I end up doing on round 65, so I guess that's not really too awful. Then again, I can't really get too many more down PRFs down in order to actually be able to really get up my Banana Central farming. Well, thankfully it is a bit fast enough that I don't necessarily have to cut out parts of this. Now I just kind of remembered that, oh yeah, Wizard Lord Phoenix is going to be out of range, so I completely forgot about that. So I did get a Chinook just so that way I can, just Chinook around to just deal a bit more damage, as a lot of the damage is of course in the main attack. As you heard earlier, 27 damage Fireball is absolutely nutty. Although Fireball doesn't really activate too often, and half the time I can't really tell when Wizard Lord Phoenix actually does the Fireball attack. So it is just kind of a meh thing. I sold Chinook just to get another BRF, as I figured that Bloonarius isn't necessarily going to get much farther, so I don't really need the BRF down to kind of Chinook this round. I am going for just kind of marketplaces, as I figured I am probably going to need to sell even more, because by the time this pops, it seems like around 69 or late 68, so which doesn't really give me a whole lot of time in order to really set down my farm, so I definitely do need the increased sellback in order to propel my farming just kind of even further in the late game. Tier 3, figure that seeing the performance from Tier 2, I kind of figured I need to pull out, like all the stops. Unfortunately, since the both Phoenixes are counted as sub-towers, they don't really benefit from Alchemist buffs, but they do get affected from speed boosts, like, Call to Arms, Homeland, and all that. So I figured I'd start working on my Ultra Boost now, as I figured that'd probably be the highest damage increase that I can necessarily give WLP at this point, other than, of course, Homeland defense. I was kind of, hoping that, like, seeing this damage, I was like, wow, this is awful. Definitely among the slower end of what we've seen so far for these kind of super buff tests. Again, like I said before, for a tower that costs like 50k, not really too ideal. Selling pretty much all my farms in order to afford defense for this tier, in order to get Ultra Boost, Homeland, Call to Arms, and all that. And really, damage still isn't really doing too great. Of course, we don't necessarily have all stacks, we're only at 4 stacks right now, but still is just kind of a bit of a shame. We are going to be able to beat this tier, but again, it's just going to take a very long time. This has me worried quite a lot, because again, farming is a huge issue. Of course, we don't necessarily need to farm as hard as we do for Elite and all the other ones, but it still is nice to, I guess, not have to worry about affording True Sun God in time for, tier 4 and 5. And looking at the damage of WLP at the moment, it seems like we definitely are going to need to be able to afford a True Sun God for the next tier, just because that's, at that point, that's the only other damage buff I can really give at this point, as we do have the damage adder that we can really add, except for, Cripple Moab, Glue Storm and all that. But really, that's not really going to be doing too much, as the main damage from the wizard is already so high, 27 damage is so high that it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Plus, the main damage comes from the Phoenix ability, not necessarily the wizard itself. So skipping forward to round 88, not really looking too great. Getting an Energizer at this point just to be able to kill Bloonarius just a wee bit faster, as I need to focus on farming just kind of ASAP. Did get a few BRFs down in the meantime, as I was pretty confident that WLP was going to be able to take them down, albeit it is a bit slow. So it's kind of giving Energizer down just to hopefully speed up this tier just kind of a little bit. As it is round 89 and I have to kill Bloonarius before round 100, which I will do, but this only leaves me like 10 or so rounds of farming, which isn't a whole lot of time in order to be able to fully set up my BRF farming. Not round 91 now, and 9 rounds of farming is not too pretty. So again, WP, we've bit disappointing throughout the test so far. It doesn't give me too much hope for tier 5 or even tier 4 if I'm not able to afford True Sun God in time. Now for tier 4, just to be able to farm even harder, I even sold Ultra Boost as well as pretty much all my support in order to be able to kind of farm even harder just for tier 4. We are short of Sun Temple by a lot, as you can see, and I will have to eventually end up selling all of my BRFs just to be able to afford what I need in order to beat down this tier of Bloonarius. Now, I did have WLP just up at the very front just to get as much damage in as possible, as I figured that, since tier 3 was slow, tier 4 is also going to be the same way. It's just going to be just as slow and take just as long in order to do this. So, getting as much damage in at the beginning as I can, just to hopefully be able to beat down this tier a bit faster. Looking at, damage of Bloonarius, even with Sun Temple, it's still not all that great of damage that WLP is doing. So at this point, I'm just kind of thinking to myself, okay, how much money do I need to be able to afford True Sun God? Because True Sun God is basically going to be my lord and savior at this point. Well, I guess it is a god, so it makes sense. But anyways, I definitely do need that support buff from True Sun God. The only fortunate part about it is, since I did put Sun Temple in the middle, just because I figured the middle is going to be the best spot, so that way I can actually be able to buff Wizard Lord Phoenix no matter wherever I put it. The problem with that is I don't really want to accidentally sacrifice pretty much all of my towers that I have, so I'm just kind of moving everything out the way just to make sure that I don't accidentally sacrifice the towers I need. So, as you can see, I start Shinnoking away, Permabrew. I got down my XXL trap. I started to get down a primary expertise. I'm not really sure why, seeing as I did have Homeland selling pretty much every farm on the map. I was able to have some left over, but it's not really kind of a whole lot in order to be able to afford it. It's kind of a just barely thing. At this point, just waiting for the Chinook cooldown to come back up so I can sacrifice my towers without, WLP being in the way. I will lose out on damage from it being a bit far away, but I do believe that it is worth it in the end, just so that way I don't accidentally end up sacrificing it and losing all of my stacks. So, after getting True Sun God, damage is not looking too much better if I'm being completely honest. It still is a bit lackluster, I will say, even with that, plus whatever damage from the True Sun God buff, it's still not really looking too great. So just getting back, all my villages, homeland defense, as well as placing the villages around the map, so that way whenever I have to Chinook WLP, I still at least get the jungle drums and village buff, no matter where he goes. As 50% attack speed, I figure would probably go a bit of a long way, so I guess, it's kind of worth it. ZOMG insides are pretty much nothing. WLP at least is good against that, although the bad insides from tier 5 do have me a little bit worried. So I guess the question you might have is, why am I not using Azili for wizards? If you didn't know, in the most recent update, Azili did get buff. It's a buff change from Battles 2 over to BT6, where basically Heartstopper and Totem, I think it increases, it's either pierce or attack speed of wizards. Why I'm not doing that is I figured Geraldo would be the best option here, as he does have that Rejuve potion which resets cooldowns. And of course Jerry's Fire, and NFT and all that. I could have also used Gwendolyn, that was another choice, as she did get buffed to help, fire-based attacks. But Gwendolyn really only buffed the Dragon's Breath attack, and I still figured that Rejuve potion and a Jerry's Fire would still be a lot more helpful than, Gwendolyn or Azili. But it was an option I did have. I just figured that, Geraldo is still OP and would probably be the best option here. So, tier 5 rolls around, basically got everything on screen that increases damage even further. Fortunately, with all these projectiles and abilities and whatnot, it really does kill the bitrate, although it's not really as bad as it was for other episodes. Anyways, I got down 4 support Chinooks, as I'm going to need a Chinook kind of around a lot. I need to both manage Super Brittle as well as WLP, just because I need to get as much damage as I can as possible. So it's definitely the most involved I have been for a super buff challenge, as I'm constantly have to Chinook manage abilities and kind of look around to make sure I'm doing everything I can in order to beat down this tier. Damage is looking there, although just barely. I think, WLP just barely has enough damage when super buff in order to take down this tier of Bloonarius. Does seem like it's going to be popping toward the end of the track, but the only thing that has me worried is the round 140 limit. I do have to pop Bloonarius by round 140 or else I kind of lose by default. So that does have me just kind of a bit worried that, you know, it is round 123 right now and we've just barely reached the first skull. So I am a bit worried that, you know, WLP may not be doing enough DPS in order to fully take down Bloonarius before round 140. The first bat inside is no problem since we do have a lot in the track. Although I will say, it is getting a bit far, although, you know, WLP is kind of far away, but still not really looking too great. Has me worried for skulls too. Of course, the last skull, as Bloonarius will definitely be so much further along in the track. Of course, here's the tech I was talking about earlier, using Rejuve Potion in order to help me do more damage. Started using the Rejuve Potion for the bad insides. I figure that's definitely when I'm going to need it, so that way Homeland, and of course the Phoenix ability is active. Of course, this does present a bit of a problem. I've already used 2 Rejuve Potions, and I'm definitely going to need one for the last skull of Bloonarius. So we got an XXL trap down in front, just to hopefully kill the rounds just a bit faster. Of course, this is also kind of a bad thing, as well as, of course, I won't necessarily have as much time in order to kill Bloonarius if I am, you know, of course, making the rounds a bit shorter. But I fear this is going to be a worthy trade-off, as we are almost there. You know, it's 8 rounds and we've beaten down 2 skulls, so at this pace we should be able to beat it before 140. But, you know, you may never know. WLP could be focusing too much on the last skull, on the bad that spawns, to where it actually is unable to beat down the health of Bloonarius. Alright, so here's the last skull. Thankfully I was able to get a Rejuve Potion just kind of in time. Switch my WLP targeting to first just to make sure I'm doing as much damage as possible to that last bad before it ends up leaking. Even like, you know, Chinooking, you know, WLP really far away just before the ZOMGs and DTs. Thankfully DTs did not end up killing me, so I was able to just Chinook back and, you know, beat down the rest of the HP. And seeing at the damage so far, I do have 8 rounds in order to beat down Bloonarius. So I think this is probably the slowest a tower has, you know, gone with killing Bloonarius. And I think WLPE is able to partly be able to kill down Bloonarius just because Carved is such a long map. I think on other weeks, like, you know, Basalt Columns or whatever, I don't necessarily believe that WLP would be able to do this. So I think, you know, it is very partly dependent on the fact that, you know, this week is so long that, you know, WLP was eventually able to just slowly chip away at his health. And so, of course, you know, with that, WLP will be joining the ranks of the towers that are able to beat down Bloonarius, although definitely going to be at the bottom of the list just because of how slow he was so far. I don't think any other tower will be slower than this. Maybe the mortars will, but even then I feel like with the new Poppinaw buff, I think mortars should be a wee bit better than how Poppinaw is doing at the current moment. And of course with that, that will be the end of the video. If you enjoyed, you know, like, comment, subscribe, join Discord. Link is down below in the description. And congratulations to WLP for being another tower that is able to pop normal Bloonarius with, you know, all the buffs and support you can possibly give it.